Welcome back. This time we're talking about War for the Planet of the Apes, the third installment in the part reboot, part prequel series of films that I consider one of the most underrated summer franchises out there today. Of course, it began in 2011 with Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and the first sequel debuted in 2014, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. And this really has been a very enjoyable franchise. And for me, as a fan of the series, I was had a lot of expectations for this third installment, and I have to say it nails the landing and really kind of completes a nearly flawless, in my opinion, trilogy. Something that's really hard to get these days. The story picks up a few years after the end of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, with Caesar, once again motion captured and voiced by Andy Serkis, trying to lead his family and the other apes to safety as they are now being hunted by the humans after Koba betrayed Caesar and started a war in the previous film. These forces are led by a colonel played by Woody Harrelson, and he's gotten it in his head that the only way humanity can survive is the utter destruction of the apes. And as far as story specifics, I really don't want to get into anything other than that. The trailers did a pretty good job of not giving away any spoilers, so I don't want to add anything to it. So that's basically the setup. If you're a fan of the first two films, definitely go check this out, because one thing I love about this trilogy is that each film is its own distinct creation. Each one has a slightly different feel to it, so it doesn't feel like we're just watching the same thing over again. But taken together, it just creates this cohesive trilogy that's honestly even greater than its already enjoyable parts. And this film in particular really showcases what has made these films so enjoyable. Strong story, fully realized characters, and amazing special effects showcased by some amazing motion capture work. Really, these films, as well as James Cameron's Avatar, are the standard bearers for motion capture acting. I mean, all of these apes are computer creations. What we're seeing did not exist in the real world, except that everything that they're doing, facial expressions, movements, everything, are based on actual actors acting these things out, and then their physical beings being replaced on screen by computer creations. And it is just amazing. Honestly, I picked both earlier films to win the special effects Oscar. Neither did, and unless there's some shocking film to come out later this year, I will most likely be picking War for the Planet of the Apes to win special effects, and if it doesn't, I will once again consider that pretty much a travesty. Now, in addition to the special effects, there are other things I want to talk about in this movie. One of those being the story. Like I said, I've enjoyed the story in both previous films. I enjoyed the story here as well. There is one noticeable difference, and I'm not saying it's an improvement or not, but it's a natural progression of the story, and that is, unlike the previous two films, Caesar really owns this movie alone. There's side characters, both returning and new, and they get the proper amount of development. They have their own little side plots and stories. But this really is Caesar's movie. If you look back at the original film, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, that was sort of a film of two stories. You had Caesar and you had Will, played by James Franco. And that film kind of served as the prologue to set up everything that was going to happen in the other films. It told its story very well and was a contained story in itself, but at the same time it was also setting up the groundwork for what we would see later with Caesar, as well as later with humanity in general. In the second film, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, again, there was sort of this dual storylines with Caesar and Malcolm, played by Jason Clarke. And their storylines really paralleled each other as two fathers, two husbands, doing what they could in a horrible situation to protect their family. And there was some wonderful duality there, showing the ape side and the human side, and how you could have two very similar stories, and one of the reasons why that film works so well. In this film, however, the main character is Caesar, alone. He is the driving force of this film. We have the villain played by Woody Harrelson. He's the catalyst for why the things that are happening in this movie are happening. But this is Caesar's movie. And really, in a way, there is still a dual story going on. We have the outside story of the physical threat posed by the colonel and his men, and Caesar trying to lead his people to a safe place where they can just finally live their lives in peace. And then we have an internal struggle with Caesar dealing with his growing hatred over how humanity continues to treat him, his family, and the rest of his people. And he feels this hatred growing, and there's a fear in him that he's going to become like Koba was in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. So there's this wonderful outside conflict that's coexisting with this internal conflict, and between the great acting, great motion capture from Andy Serkis, and all put together with the great special effects, it comes to life in wonderful quality in this film. And while I'm talking about how all of the acting and the voice work and the special effects come together, showing how these films have a clear progression is how the apes are, and their abilities are kind of evolving from film to film. They're learning more, they're becoming more sophisticated, and it's believable from film to film to film that this is happening. It feels organic to the overall story, and it's just a really nice touch and showing that they care about the small details in this film, something that a lot of blockbusters tend to forget. This is a film that is very detail oriented and is not just satisfied to give a loud, explosion-filled film because they figure that's what the audiences want. They know the story and the characters are really what drive this movie, and spent a lot of time making sure that they were as good as they possibly could be. I've already mentioned the acting several times, but Andy Serkis is wonderful. It is just, again, a showcase on what motion capture can be, and how, like voice acting, is not an inferior form of acting. It is a very involved process, and one that, with the right partners, can develop a amazingly real and authentic character who just happens to be a computer-generated ape. Woody Harrelson is great as always. He plays a very intimidating villain in this movie. Like I said in my Spider-Man review, he's basically the hero of his own story. He thinks he's doing what is necessary for humanity to survive. That doesn't make what he's doing right, but it makes it understandable from his point of view, and that's what we need from our villains. And as I've said multiple times, it's showing that they spent the time to develop the characters properly and to write them in a way that they could be developed into the fully realized people that we see in these movies. Another person I want to mention is Amaya Miller. She plays the young little girl that you've probably seen in the trailers. I don't want to give away anything about her character, but she was a very interesting addition to the story. Her character was, and I thought she acted it very well. For a young actor, this was a demanding role because it involved a lot of facial expressions and a lot of physical acting. And I thought she did a very good job as a young actor in that kind of role. And I really enjoyed her character, and I thought, again, they did a good job of giving her enough personality where she didn't overshadow the other characters, but she definitely held her own in a pretty ensemble cast at this point. I also want to mention the music. There was a noticeable shift in the music style of this movie. It's been a long time, I have to admit, since I've seen any of the original Planet of the Apes movies. But from what I remember from them, the music in War for the Planet of the Apes was purposefully reminiscent of the music from the original film. As we sort of continue to bridge the gap between where we began this story at the beginning of Rise of the Planet of the Apes to the eventual Planet of the Apes. And at first, I really wasn't sure what to think about it because it was a noticeable shift from the music of the second film. And it seemed like they might have been trying a little too hard, but it really grew on me. It worked for this world and kind of set a mood that a more standard score probably wouldn't have done. So overall, I really came to enjoy it by the end. So that was something I did want to mention. Really, I had very, very few complaints about this movie. The plot, like the second film, based on the trailers, I was worried it was going to go in several pretty cliched directions. But like with Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, they really defied expectations and did not settle for the easy routes. I had a couple ideas of what I thought were going to happen, and really only about one of them did, and not in the way I was expecting it to. Really, I found this film very enjoyable. My only really minor complaint, and it might be explained by a second viewing, and I don't want to spoil anything, but I'll just say there's a kind of a geographical quirk that occurs in the climactic finale, where people really shouldn't have been where they were, but they were there because it added dramatic tension to the moment. But it really didn't make sense, and it kind of pulled me out of the movie for a few moments. I was trying to figure out why these particular characters were where they were. And there could be an off-camera explanation, or it might have been explained in a deleted scene, or I just may have been wrong, but I'm pretty sure I wasn't, and that was really my only, I wouldn't even call it a major complaint. It was kind of a minor thing, but it's sort of a plot hole-ish type issue in the finale. But other than that, I found that this film, again, nailed the landing to make a really, really enjoyable trilogy of films. Each one delivering its own style, its own story, its own personality, but still fitting into the overall story, where if you watch them 1, 2, and 3, you get a grand, epic tale that honestly is just near perfect. This is definitely going to be in my top 10 of trilogies of all time, because it nailed the landing. If it does well, odds are we'll probably see a fourth one. I'll go see it. But honestly, they could stop now and I would be perfectly happy. This is a perfect bookended story that doesn't need anything else. It is a wonderful film. If you're a fan of the first two films, definitely go see this. If you're not a fan of the first two movies, I respect all opinions. I just have to disagree with you, and I guess you're just going to find another movie to go enjoy this summer. If you have not seen the first two movies, go check them out. I know I've spoiled some things that have happened in the other films, and I apologize for that, but it's kind of hard to talk about the third film of a trilogy if you haven't, without spoiling things that happened in the previous films. But still, go see it. These are wonderful movies, and this is a great part 3 of a really solid trilogy. So obviously, you know my opinion of this movie. What did you think of War for the Planet of the Apes? Do you think this is a solid conclusion to the trilogy? And where would you rank this among trilogies? As always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some other reviews, and until next time, I'll see you at the movies.